Well, let's see how the network connection works. It says it's low. Anyway. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishnaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvisesha Shunyavari Paschatya Satarine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shadvaita Gadadhar Shrivasari Gaur Bhaktavinda Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangu Langayate Girim Yakrapatamaham Vande Sri Guru Dinatarinam Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shadvaita Gadadhar Shrivasari Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to turn these lights off because the sun is rising, and I think that might be better. We're going to see. Don't go anywhere. I'm not at home, so we have a new location. Yeah, we get light from the the sun is rising. What if I turn it like this? Maybe that's better. It's the porch. And then everyone who walks in the kitchen, you'll see. I don't know. Maybe that's better. So, yesterday, if you weren't here, we were discussing the topic of sense gratification. And one of, I think, the more important things that I mentioned was how sense gratification makes it difficult or impossible to understand Krishna, especially to understand Krishna's Leelas deeply, especially those intimate Leelas. And I made the point, I think I made the point, that that's an extremely high price to pay for sense gratification. So, we might be engaged in some activity which seems innocent, not so bad, but activities that aren't engaged directly in Krishna service, and particularly activities of sense gratification, they in many ways block our Krishna consciousness. If those activities are not regulated or are not within the paradigm of devotional service. And sometimes the devotee may give in to those activities for whatever reason, but I just want to make the point that there's a price that we pay for that. And it slows down our devotional service, and that makes it more difficult, because when we engage in activities to gratify our senses, it tends to cloud our consciousness, attract us more to doing those activities again. And especially one of the great prizes of devotional service is to understand Krishna's intimate pastimes in Vrindavan and to relish those. And we ended the class by saying how important it is to relish Krishna consciousness. And so sense gratification, it dulls our ability, or it even nullifies, depending on what we're doing, our ability to appreciate Krishna consciousness. And then I mentioned that sometimes when one engages in sense gratification, one may think that this is as good as Krishna consciousness, or almost as good, or as enjoyable, which is not a good way to think, because it's not true. But in our conditioned state, it may appear that way. So, and then in previous classes, we had mentioned about controlling our senses in relation to sexual desires, and how to come to a higher state of Krishna consciousness, a state where we could chant Shuddhanam, which is our goal, that's going to be impeded by engaging in illicit sex. So although some may think it's enjoyable, it actually comes with a price. So that was my point. So someone might say, I'm fallen, I have these desires, I have to engage them, and in some cases it's true. Some people are not ready for Krishna consciousness to fully control them. But when one is a devotee and one wants to be surrendered, then one should know that if you want to come to a higher state of Krishna consciousness, these activities of sense gratification are really diametrically opposed to bhakti, and they will impede one from experiencing a higher taste of Krishna consciousness. So that was, I think, an important point that we made yesterday. Sense gratification comes with a price. It may feel good, but we had discussed that sense gratification in Krishna consciousness really is only required to maintain the body, because sense gratification is really opposed to the practice of bhakti, because bhakti means to satisfy Krishna's senses. So if I'm engaged in satisfying my senses instead of Krishna's senses, that's opposed to the principle of bhakti. And in fact, in Nectar of Devotion, Rupa Goswami defines sadhana bhakti as engagement of the senses in Krishna's service. So you could say sense control is really foundationally defined as sadhana bhakti. Using my senses to satisfy Krishna's senses rather than using my senses to satisfy my senses. So what I did yesterday and this morning was go through or search this topic of sense gratification, see what Prabhupada said. And one interesting thing that I came across was how often Prabhupada used this word in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And there's so much discussion. I don't know if you realize how much reference there is to the word sense gratification in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita. But there's a lot. Okay, I'm gonna see if we can get rid of that background. That's better. There's a tremendous amount of reference to the word sense gratification. I was actually a little bit amazed by that. I didn't realize it. So we're going to read, and some of this you may think is quite basic, but we're going to try to discuss it and maybe go a little deeper. And one thing that I have experience of, if you discuss a topic and you research what Prabhupada has said on it, you will find that he says many similar things in different places, but that helps you understand it a little better. Even if you're kind of reading the same thing, it just makes the point a little deeper, a little more clear. So I think that's going to happen from reading this. So stick with me, and I just wanted you to hear all the things Prabhupada said about sense gratification. I think that'll be very purifying for you to hear. Hare Krishna. People in general, especially in this age of Kali, this is all second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, especially in this age of Kali, are enamored by the external energy of Krishna, and they wrongly think that by advancement of material comforts, every man will be happy. They have no knowledge that the material or external nature is very strong, for everyone is strongly bound by the stringent laws of material nature. A living entity is happily the part and parcel of Krishna, and thus his natural function is to render immediate service to the Lord. By the spell of illusion, one tries to be happy by serving his personal sense gratification in different forms, which will never make him happy. Instead of satisfying his own personal material senses, he has to satisfy the senses of the Lord. That is the highest perfection. The Lord wants this, and he demands it. Krishna is very demanding. One has to understand this central point of Bhagavad Gita. Our Krishna consciousness movement is teaching the whole world this central point. And because we are not polluting the theme of Bhagavad Gita as it is, anyone seriously interested in deriving benefit by studying the Bhagavad Gita must take help from the Krishna Consciousness Movement for practical understanding of Bhagavad Gita under the guidance of the Lord. So, last sentence, we hope therefore that people will derive the greatest benefit by studying Bhagavad Gita as it is, as we have presented it here. And if even one man becomes a pure devotee of the Lord, we shall consider our attempt a success. I don't think that second chapter, that may be the introduction. But I want to go back to a point here, which is quite interesting, is that Prabhupada is saying, instead of satisfying his own personal senses, he has to satisfy the senses of the Lord. Very simple point, right? We either satisfy Krishna's senses or we satisfy our own senses. Then what does Prabhupada say? Which is kind of significant. Prabhupada says, that is the highest perfection of life. If you can satisfy Krishna's senses instead of your own, if that's what your life's about, that's the highest perfection of life. Not only is it the highest perfection of life, the Lord wants this, the Lord demands it, so this is what He wants you and me to do. He's actually demanding that we do it. We satisfy His senses other than ours. And then, Prabhupada says something kind of significant. I don't know if you picked up on it. One has to understand this central point of Bhagavad Gita. So let's say you give someone a Bhagavad Gita and they say, well, like in one sentence, tell me what's the central point of this book. Well, Prabhupada has just told us. The central point of the book is to satisfy the senses of God rather than to satisfy your own senses. That's interesting, isn't it? Did you know that? That Prabhupada said that? That's the central point of Bhagavad Gita. To satisfy Krishna's senses rather than our own. That's interesting, isn't it? Yes. Don't you think? That's interesting. This is the highest perfection of life and the central point of Bhagavad Gita. What is the central point of Bhagavad Gita? Control your senses. If you control your senses, then you can please Krishna's senses. Actually, I can speak from my own experience that sometimes to please Krishna's senses, we have to do some austerity, which is unpleasing. It's not pleasing to the body, or it may not be pleasing to the mind. But even though we're undergoing this austerity, what's happening? Because we're able to please Krishna's senses, we are experiencing such pleasure and such happiness. It's like it can't be compared to anything we could get from sense gratification. And sense gratification, it dulls our consciousness. So the senses are stimulated, but the consciousness, it may be excited, there's some pleasure, but ultimately it dulls our consciousness. It inhibits our ability to relish Krishna consciousness. That's why austerity is recommended. So austerity basically means you're denying yourself something. And in that denial, you experience something very great in Krishna consciousness. It's interesting. To say the least, it's interesting that you can deny yourself. You can do austerity. You can sacrifice some eating and sleeping. And you can experience much greater happiness than if you indulge in increasing your eating and sleeping and mating and defending. I think also that those of us who become Krishna conscious, we have this experience. Maybe we didn't understand it in relation to spiritual advancement, but we had this experience that we were doing and getting what we want, but it was bringing our consciousness down. It was making us more unhappy. And society said it's supposed to make you happy. So it wasn't making us happy. And then you've probably experienced doing some austerity in Krishna consciousness. And austerity means you're making all kinds of sacrifices of personal interest, and you're experiencing this huge, huge increase in happiness. Even materially, if you make some sacrifice for somebody else, you experience a special kind of happiness that you can't get from satisfying your senses. Isn't it? So as I said before, serving another person, and especially serving Krishna, it allows you to enter a realm of happiness or emotional experience that's impossible to get by satisfying your senses. And people don't understand this. But it's a very interesting point, isn't it? What you can get through serving another, the experience, is so much greater and uniquely different from any form of sense gratification, no matter what it is. I once told this story, which is so interesting. Well, let me preface this story. There's one motivational speaker, he was talking about money, and he said that people who have a lot of money are actually in more anxiety about money than the people who have less money. How to keep it, how to invest it. And if it's invested, there's the potential to lose a lot. So they could lose hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, when the stock market goes down. So there's a lot of anxiety around it. And so, one who doesn't have money would think having a lot of money would relieve anxiety. I know, for example, when I'm in India and I see poor people, I always wish I had prasadam, because if I give them money, I just don't know what they'll do with it. And sometimes when I'm in India, I think the one thing that I like least about it is the fact that there's poor people, and I sometimes wish that I were wealthy so I could help them. But what if you're really, really wealthy and you're living a very high lifestyle? I think it could be a little painful if you couldn't help these poor people to see, because there's such a difference between the way you live. And so I think some wealthy people actually experience that kind of anxiety, that I'm living this high lifestyle. There's so many poor people. And Prabhupada actually said in Isa Upanishad that you should only acquire what you need, because it's actually sinful to live on a higher standard than you actually need. And Prabhupada, as far as I remember, was saying because it creates an imbalance. You have more than you need, someone has less than they need. Of course you might say it's karma. But Prabhupada wasn't approaching it that way. It was just take what you need. If you take more, you're a thief. It's not, you don't need more. So that perhaps could be, especially for us, if we have lots and lots of wealth, we might feel that, yeah. Or when you have wealth, there's a tendency to enjoy just because you have it. I've noticed with myself and others that we tend to live according to our means, and when our means increases, most people tend to go bigger and better and have more comforts, which is, you would think for a devotee, it wouldn't be something we would do, but even devotees do it. So there's just that tendency when you have more wealth, you upgrade your comforts, you upgrade your standards, you can afford things. A more comfortable car, more comfortable furniture, more comfortable chair, more comfortable desk, more conveniences in your kitchen. Yeah, it's just, so we tend to do that. But does that help us? Is that going to make us happier? It makes us more comfortable. Make us happier? No. Austerity actually makes us happier. Isn't that interesting? Not comforts. That's interesting, isn't it? Austerity, which means the lack of comfort, actually makes us happy. So the story I wanted to tell, I may have told the story before, which I find fascinating. George Harrison once was visiting India in Vrindavan, and he was staying with Prithu Prabhu, and I was told, I don't think Prithu Prabhu told me, I think someone else told me. And he must have been somewhat close to Prithu, because he revealed that he was earning through royalty something like $1 million a day at that point, which is interesting. The Beatles were the most popular rock band. I think they still are. Their songs have been covered more, or some of their songs have been covered, recorded by other artists, at least twice as much as the most covered song in the history of the world. The Beatles songs covered twice that. And all the albums and remastered and all the songs used in commercials and the sales of their records, they just keep going, they never stop. And so he was actually getting in royalty $1 million a day, which of course is 365 million. That's $1 billion in 3 years. And if you think of $1 million, that's 100,000 times 10. You know, if you had 100,000, that would be quite sufficient. But what if you had 10 times that? And there was no end in sight of that money coming in. You might think, that's pretty good. That would make life pleasing and easy. You know what he said? And I can only guess why he said it. He said, I'm making $1 million a day and it's putting me in total anxiety. Like if you're making $1 million a day, you have to start thinking, that is so much more money than everyone else in the world is getting. Perhaps that's why he was in anxiety. Or what do I do with it all? How do I spend it? And what about all the people who become friends with me? And how do I maintain this money? What about all the people that know I have this money? And, you know, sometimes children of wealthy people are kidnapped. You know, who knows? But this motivational speaker was basically saying the same thing. There's high anxiety with a high sense gratification, high wealth. Now, we may look at people who are wealthy and we may not think that. But anyway, at least, for the sake of a philosophical discussion, we want to establish the point that austerity brings much greater happiness than sense gratification. So I think that's an important point. When you control yourself, control your senses, you're able to enter into deeper levels of Krishna consciousness and therefore experience higher levels of bliss. So it's not that sense gratification makes you happy. In fact, as we're saying, sense gratification dulls the consciousness. So because it dulls the consciousness, then it reduces our happiness. Does that make sense? Yeah, it reduces our level of happiness. So, yes. And you had made some comments. I will go back to them. I have a lot to read, but when we try to satisfy Krishna senses, then we are in spiritual energy, not material. Yes, exactly. How do we know we are satisfying the Lord's senses? Well, there's a couple of ways you can know, just by knowing what are the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness. By doing that, you're satisfying Krishna senses. By following the instructions of Srila Prabhupada, by following the instructions of your spiritual master, or following instructions of seniors, mentors, they're guiding you how to please Krishna. So by following their instructions, you're pleasing Krishna. Prabhupada would say, do Sankirtan, go distribute my books, or read my books, go to Mangalarti, all these things. So by doing that, we know we're satisfying Krishna's senses, because the spiritual master is only directing you to do things to satisfy Krishna's senses. When you're preaching, when you're sharing Krishna consciousness, when you're doing something to expand the movement, definitely that effort is totally engaged in satisfying Krishna's senses. Krishna Karshani, you said austerity can make us happy. What about the statement that too much austerity may make someone's heart hard? Well, austerity has to be according to your realization, number one. But Prabhupada was also referring to yogis who they're not engaged in bhakti, and they think the ultimate goal is austerity. Now, let's spin it around in another direction. Austerity for the sake of austerity, which is not connected to pleasing Krishna, is not what we want to do. And so that kind of austerity definitely would make your heart hard, especially if it's a struggle for that austerity. So our austerity is not for austerity's sake, our austerity is to please Krishna. That's why we do it. So any sacrifice you make that pleases Krishna will make your heart soft. But still, if the austerity is artificial in the sense that it's a huge struggle for you, then that could be detrimental to you. Just like Prabhupada, he was not one to push people to take initiation, because he would say, for someone who took initiation or wasn't following, he would say, why did you promise if you weren't going to follow? He didn't say, it was good that you took initiation, even though you can't follow. No, he said, why did you take initiation if you didn't think you can follow or you weren't planning to follow? So Prabhupada wasn't one to push people into austerity artificially. For sure, he wasn't one to do that. He was one for gradually advance in Krishna consciousness and do austerity because you want to, because it's natural according to your level of Krishna consciousness. Of course, you could say, how do I know what austerity I should do according to my level of Krishna consciousness? Well, that you'll see as you advance what you're able to do. But the principle is that if I can minimize sense gratification, then I can maximize utilizing my senses to please Krishna. So maybe I don't eat something. It's not healthy or it's not good for my consciousness. That's an austerity. I try to go to bed early. I like to stay up late. That's an austerity. I undergo some personal inconvenience for spreading Krishna consciousness. That's an austerity. I do something my spiritual master wants me to do, which I find difficult. Or I don't think it's going to make me happy. That's an austerity. So there are so many opportunities for austerity within Krishna consciousness. But if I focus too much on austerity, or I try to do austerities which are far beyond my ability to maintain, that could be detrimental. The other way austerity is detrimental is if I do austerity to show off, to prove that I'm better than others, or to advertise that I'm renounced. So that austerity would just be feeding your false ego. So that would make your, I would say, your heart not only hard, but it could be very destructive, because the whole motive in doing the austerity is wrong. So the whole idea of austerity is that you'll make some sacrifice of your own sense gratification to please Krishna. And we do austerities during certain days, Ekadasi, we make some vratas during certain months. I will do something, I won't do something. And everyone experiences that, it's purifying. So austerity is meant for purification, not for making our heart hard. But there's a verse, I believe it was Narada Muni, who said, if you're Krishna conscious, what's the use of austerity? Because the austerity is really built into the practice. And one time a devotee was late for a morning walk in Vrindavan, and he didn't have time to get his shoes, and he ran out, and Prabhupada said, where are your shoes? And he said, Prabhupada, I was late, I just wanted to catch up. And Prabhupada said, there's already enough austerity in Krishna consciousness, you don't have to make it more austere. So the point was, it's not that we do austerity for austerity's sake. Let me sleep on a bed of nails, that will be good for my spiritual life. No, we do austerity which is pleasing to Krishna's senses. Do austerities in the service of helping others like that. So Narada Muni is saying, the goal of austerity is to be Krishna conscious, and if you're Krishna conscious, what's the use of austerity in and of itself, because you've already achieved the goal. So in and of it, but you could say at any level of Krishna consciousness, austerity for austerity's sake is not what we want. And he said, if you're not Krishna conscious, what's the use of austerity? Because austerity for austerity's sake will not make you Krishna conscious. So when we say austerity, it's not austerity for austerity's sake. It's something that will be pleasing to Krishna. And if it's austerity and it's not pleasing to Krishna, what's the point? It's not going to help you spiritually, and it may harm you. So, yes, that's a good point. Thank you for that. Parananda Prema Ki Jai. I remember how the Vaishnavas once told me that if someone is not free from lust, he should finish studying first or second canto, as I remember. The first and second represent the lotus feet of the Lord. And I've heard that if we still have sexual desire, we should read Krishna book, Rasa Dance. It's a summary, Krishna book, summary of the 10th canto, songs. How to properly understand songs of Srimad Bhagavatam, songs of the gopis. How to understand this contradiction. Are there any explanations? Yeah. Well, what I know about this is that, well, I heard in Gaudiya Math when they would read, when they were like reading through Bhagavatam or Chaitanya Charitamrita, and if they were reading any of these intimate leelas with Krishna and the gopis, there was no discussion. They would read through it because it was part of the reading to read the entire Bhagavatam or read the entire CC, but they would have no discussion because it was considered very high topics and very confidential. So one should be a little careful not when he reads these intimate activities to read them respectfully and to read them with the realization that I'm a conditioned soul who has the desire to enjoy the opposite sex, and there is every chance that I could, well, I would say every chance I could, that doesn't make sense. There's a chance that I could view these pastimes from a very material or mundane perspective. So I enter with that understanding. Now, if you read Krishna book, you'll see reading Krishna book is kind of like reading Krishna Leela with Bhagavad Gita purports. So Prabhupada asked us to distribute Krishna book. It was published in 1970. He didn't tell us read it later and distribute it later when the world's ready, but he explained everything. So the idea is, if you have a philosophical understanding of who is Krishna and who you are, and you have a respectful attitude, then when you read the Leelas of Krishna and the gopis, it should purify you by helping you understand who Krishna is, and thus understanding who you are, which is you're not Krishna, and you can't do what Krishna does. And if you are able to relish what Krishna does, it will purify you from the desire to imitate Krishna. That's the idea. But you begin first canto, because the first canto and the cantos that lead up to the 10th canto will lay the foundation for understanding who Krishna is, so that when you get to the 10th canto, you can then relish and become purified by the more intimate leelas, because you are now fully aware of Krishna's position and aware of your position, and you've overcome your desire to imitate Krishna by enjoying the opposite sex. And that's why we were saying yesterday that if you don't control your senses, then basically what you're doing is you're imitating Krishna. And then how will you understand Krishna if you're imitating him? You can't. So when you're hearing Krishna's Leelas, if you're in the mood of a devotee of service, then you can relish those Leelas, then you can understand them. But if you're in the mood, still in the mood of enjoyer, you want to enjoy like Krishna, then it's possible that hearing those Leelas will actually activate your desire to enjoy. Or hearing those Leelas will make it difficult for you to understand that it's not a Leela between an ordinary man and an ordinary woman, or ordinary boy and girl. It has nothing to do with that. You know, Krishna, he steals the gopis' clothes. And so now you're hearing a description that the gopis are coming and they're naked in front of Krishna. And just so for some men, just to hear the word naked woman agitates their mind. Maybe they're not ready to hear this pastime. Krishna's playing with the gopis in the water, or their descriptions of Krishna touching their breast, and all these intimate things. And they hear the word breast, and it agitates their mind, even though it's the gopis' transcendental body, which has nothing to do with the material body. And even though these gopis, some of them came as Goswamis, but in that female form, what appears to be female and the word breast, and they just get agitated. They can't hear it. They're not ready. So if that's your case, then you don't want to hear those things yet. You're not ready to hear them, because it brings those leelas down to a mundane level. If you are more transcendental, you realize this has nothing to do with anything mundane. And by hearing them, you're becoming free from lust, because you realize this is pure love, and mundane affairs is pure lust. And so if you can be pure enough to be qualified enough to hear these leelas in the right frame of mind, it will purify you of your lust. So one time they were talking about this, and some devotees were focused on hearing about Krishna's intimate leelas with the gopis. And Prabhupada said this is, Gopi Bhav is the highest state of Krishna consciousness. And so they reasoned that if we just hear about the pastimes of the gopis, because it's the highest, we will achieve the highest Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada said that's okay if you're qualified. You'll be purified, but if you're not qualified, you'll be putrefied. Putrefied means decayed or destroyed. So instead of purified, which means free from all, you'll become completely free from all lust. You become putrefied, you become destroyed, and it will actually activate your lust. So, if you're reading these intimate leelas and your mind becomes disturbed, you shouldn't read them. It means you're not ready. You just skip over them. But the way Prabhupada has described it in the Krishna book, hopefully makes it easier for us to enter into the leela without being disturbed by understand. And it says the gopis kiss Krishna. Why do they kiss Krishna? Why do you kiss somebody? Why do you kiss your lover? Because it gives you pleasure. So, great pleasure. Man kisses a girl kisses a boy, especially when they're very young and they're just falling in love. It gives them great pleasure. That's why they do it. Generally, he's not kissing her or she's not kissing him to give the other person pleasure. They're kissing to give themselves pleasure. Well, the gopis don't do that. They're not like us. So when they kiss Krishna, it's because they know it will give him pleasure. And anything they do because it'll give Krishna pleasure. And if it doesn't give Krishna pleasure, they would never do it. They would never want to do it. They never will do it. You see? So you have to understand that. So sometimes it sounds like they're doing what we do, and then we're thinking, well, they're just doing what we're doing, so they must be doing it for the same reason we do it. Krishna touches the breast of Radharani. I mean, how do you understand that? When a man touches a breast of a woman, he's not doing it to give her pleasure, he's doing it to give himself. Oh, it might give her pleasure, but his main motive is to give himself pleasure, generally. So, if Krishna and Radha, or Krishna and the gopis, are intimately exchanging what appears to be something very sexual, we understand that they can only act, number one, transcendentally, because they have transcendental bodies. Number two, because they're completely pure, there's no question of acting materially. And because it's Krishna and the gopis, their only attitude, their only motive in doing anything is to please Krishna. They don't have a consciousness of sense gratification. It doesn't exist within them. So if you understand all that, and you're firmly, at least somewhat realize that, I don't want to say realize on a high level, but you realize that Krishna is transcendental, the gopis are transcendental. On that level, there's pure love, and pure love solely means satisfying one another. Then when you read those leelas, then you'll understand that, but it won't disturb you. And so that was what Prabhupada was trying to do in the Krishna book. And of course, reading Bhagavatam up to the 10th canto should give you that foundation, so you don't misunderstand Krishna's position. Otherwise, people will say, well, Krishna has his gopis, why can't I have my gopis? Right? I mean, if he has his, he's God. Maybe he's just setting an example. And it's true, he is setting an example. And he's setting the example that you should have one wife and remain chaste to one wife. You shouldn't have a lot of girlfriends. And you might say, well, how was that an example? Because he had 16,000 wives. And you say, yeah. He's setting an example that he's the enjoyer and he can do that, and he's setting an example that you can't do that. And so we wrongly think, no, he's setting an example that I should follow and do what he does. Right? So that means you haven't read the Bhagavatam, and so you go right to the 10th canto, and then you think, well, Krishna had lots of wives, why can't I? He's God. He must be setting an example. Yeah, he's setting an example that you have one wife and I'll have 16,000 because I'm the supreme enjoyer and you're not. And I don't need to become purified and you do. So you have one. Undergo whatever difficulties are involved in maintaining one wife. Be devoted to that wife. Be chaste to that wife or husband. Be a good husband. Be a good wife. Whatever difficulties, tolerate it. Know that you're not the enjoyer, you'll become purified. And you're not going to go to heaven and get 72 virgins. That's not what we teach. You're going to go to heaven, the spiritual world, and you'll have no desire for even one virgin. You'll be completely pure. So that's Krishna consciousness. Now our consciousness is contaminated with the desire to enjoy the opposite sex. If you bring that consciousness into Krishna Lila, you spoil everything. And then you don't get the benefit, which is to liberate you. Is that okay? So I guess the answer would be that you have to evaluate if you're ready, and you see by hearing those pastimes. Are you becoming purified or putrefied? Are you feeling transcendental bliss, or are you feeling mundane impetus? Are you, like I told the story the other day that there was a brahmachari class, and they were talking about illicit sex and the entanglement of it and so forth. And after the class, the sannyasi who gave the class asked one of the devotees, how did you like the class? And he said, actually, you were talking so much about illicit sex that it disturbed me rather than purified me. So, it was meant to detach him, but he kept talking, don't have sex, and there are different kinds of sex, and don't think of sex. And don't think of beautiful women, and and they're with their raised breast and their thin waist and their beautiful, so just talking about sex and women. And so for some brahmacharis, after they hear the class, say, yes, Maharaj, I feel very purified, I feel very detached. And this one young man felt very agitated because they're talking about beautiful women and sex. How you should be detached from these things, but it agitated his mind. So if these things agitate your mind, you better not hear them, right? Krishna Karshini asks, I'm wondering if our pleasing Krishna's senses is sometimes not an excuse just to please our own senses. Yeah, it can be, but then you have to be honest about it. And Prabhupada said that he gave the example that sometimes a person will open a temple, but he's actually opening the temple as a business, because in India, if you open a temple, people are generous, many people come to the temple, and you could support yourself and your family just by maintaining the deity. So in the name of doing service, actually your motive is to maintain yourself. So it looks like you're pleasing Krishna's senses, but in fact you're pleasing your own senses. But you're using it in the name of Krishna's service. So taking that principle, I'm pleasing my senses in the name of Krishna's service, then we have to ask ourselves, are we doing that ourselves? And only you can answer that. So why am I, is it just, in other words, is it just that I like to do this, and so, because I like to do it, I say I'm doing it for Krishna, but I'm really just doing it for my sense gratification. Now, the point is, okay, you like to do it, how can you engage it in Krishna's service? So you find ways that will be helpful for spreading Krishna consciousness, for example. So you say, well, I have this talent, I like doing it, can I use it in Krishna's service? and you find ways to use it. But if you can't really use it well in Krishna service, you don't use it as an excuse. Say, no, I'm doing this for Krishna. And we'll say, how are you doing that for Krishna? It seems like you're doing it for yourself, and you're just saying you're doing it for Krishna. Does Krishna even really want you to do this? So you might be doing something saying you're doing for Krishna, but it doesn't even, your guru doesn't even want you to do it. You've been told not to do it. The Shastra doesn't say you should do it. You can't, it's not really helping spread Krishna consciousness. So you have two things. One thing is you engage something in Krishna service. The other thing is you engage your sense gratification, and you call it Krishna consciousness. So that's true. Prabhupada actually said that was one of the reasons the Gaudiya Math had trouble. Because, some people wanted power and position, and it wasn't a pure desire. And so in the name of service, actually their motive was power and position. So he felt it was more that they wanted sense gratification in the name of service. In the name of service, you'll take position if Krishna wants, or you won't take position if he doesn't want. But if you're, focused on position, no, I need to be in charge, that will help. But it really won't help, and you really, the motive is that you want to be in charge. Then, that's different. That is a problem. I'm just going through and see if there's any comments. And okay, so let's read some more, see what Prabhupada says. What Prabhupada is saying, it's the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, so it's quite simple. But one of the nice things about Krishna consciousness is that even though what Prabhupada says might seem simple externally, you can penetrate it by your own consciousness. And there's always unlimited depth to what Prabhupada says, to what Shastra says. So, this is from a purport in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Owing to a gross material conception of things, most men in this age cannot imagine how such a small particle can become both so great and so small. So men look at the soul proper as wonderful, either by constitution or by description. In other words, that verse, the soul, it must be the verse, the soul is amazing, or the description of the minuteness of the soul. Illusioned by the material energy, people are so engrossed in subject matters for sense gratification that they have very little time to understand the question of self-understanding, even though it is a fact that without this self-understanding, all activities result in ultimate defeat in the struggle for existence. Perhaps they have no idea that one must think of the soul and thus make a solution to the material miseries. So, this is nice because one way to look at this is Prabhupada saying, well, if you have no knowledge of the soul, then what do? You're engrossed in subject matters for sense gratification, just like we all were before we were devotees. And I think anyone who became a devotee is certainly a pious person, religiously inclined, a nice person, a good person, but because they had no knowledge, then what could they do? It would just be... So Prabhupada's kind upon them here, saying, perhaps they have no idea, so they're just engrossed in sense gratification. And then the other point he makes is that people don't have time for self-realization. Why? Because they're too busy trying to satisfy their senses. Do you know that Prabhupada once wrote an article called, I think it was called No Time? It is so funny because in the article Prabhupada was saying when he approaches people to take it back to Godhead, because he was actually distributing back to Godhead, people say, I don't have any time. What's so funny about it is when I would go on book distribution, excuse me sir, I'd like, excuse me sir, have you seen this book? Sorry, I have no time. They would say the same thing. This was, like 40 years later. Sorry, I have no time. So funny, right? I've got time for sense gratification, but I have time for Facebook, but I have no time for self-realization. Yeah. So that's the problem, isn't it? Nobody has time. And that, Bhagavatam says people in Kali Yuga are unfortunate. That's an aspect of their misfortune. They don't have time for self-realization. They have time to get drunk. They have time to smoke pot. They have time to go wherever they go and do whatever they do to gratify themselves. But self-realization, I don't have time. Like one of the things I find so interesting is that many people, when they begin Krishna consciousness, they'll tell me, I'm chanting 1 round a day, and they're beginning their practice. And I'm thinking, 1 round, that's like 8 minutes. That's all the time you have? You could only... So what's the point? We're not used to setting aside a time. We're not used to setting aside time for spiritual activities. So when you start out in Krishna consciousness, you make time to chant 1 round or even 4 rounds. That's a half hour. That's nothing. Isn't that interesting? I'm chanting 1 round a day. What else do you do? Well, I read 1 verse of Bhagavad Gita. So okay, now you're at 15 minutes a day for self-realization. Why? Well, we're not used to it. Most of us, we weren't raised to spend time. And your parents were always pushing you. What? Get good grades. Then you'll get a good job and you'll make money. Were your parents pushing you? Get up, chant your rounds. Unless they're devotees, probably not. Get up and do your prayers. Get up, You need to put time into your self-realization. That's what's important. Not your work, not your career. That's necessary. But that's not the most important thing. How many parents told us that? My parents didn't tell me that. They didn't even know what self-realization was. And even in India you find today, even though they know what self-realization is, they tend to push their kids away from spirituality. And I'm dealing with so many devotees who tell me that their parents don't want them to go to the temple. And even their parents chant Hare Krishna, and they don't want their kids to go to the temple because they see it gets in the way of their studies. So isn't that interesting? They have little time to understand the question of self-understanding. Even though it's a fact, without this self-understanding, all activities result in ultimate defeat. I find that so interesting, that in India, parents would push their kids away from devotional service and just say, now at this time of life, we just study. And what did Prabhupada say? There's so many times when Prabhupada was asked, why do you need to do this when you're young? You should do it when you're old. Now they're young, they need to enjoy, gratify their senses, make a career and so forth. And so Prabhupada, he would ask a question and say, well, what does old mean? And he was trying to get the answer out of them that old means you're close to death. So once he would, or if they didn't give the answer, he would give that answer. And he would say, can you guarantee anybody's not close to death? In other words, can you guarantee anybody's not old? And what could they say? You can't guarantee. So then Prabhupada would say, therefore, Krishna consciousness should be done now. It's most important. Because you don't know who is old and who isn't. Good point, right? And so Prabhupada's making that point here. So, you engage a life of sense gratification and you die. You just lost the game. You engage a life of Krishna consciousness, you die. You just won the game. So India is really, it's amazing what I see in India. A devotee is telling me, my parents won't let me go to the temple. They won't let me do this. They don't want me engaged in Krishna consciousness. And I said, but I thought they were devotees. They chant japa they chant 16 rounds a day. And they don't want me to associate with devotees. Incredible. I'm like, wait a minute. Could you say that again? That didn't make sense. They're devotees. They chant japa. And they don't want you to... Yeah, because they feel it will be detrimental to my studies. So, what Prabhupada's saying here has infiltrated so deeply that even some people who are practicing Krishna consciousness, believe it or not, are afraid that their kids will be too much distracted by it, and they might become self-realized when they're young, and if they become self-realized when they're young, it wouldn't be good for their material life. So it's interesting, isn't it? What Prabhupada's saying here, it is like it's even infiltrating in the lives of some people who are, I don't want to say they're really good devotees, but they're connected with our movement, they're practicing Krishna consciousness, and they don't understand this principle because the culture has promoted sense gratification and material success to such a degree that even a devotee's parents are chanting Hare Krishna, but they don't want them to associate with devotees. Isn't that interesting? I find that actually more than interesting. I find that like amazing. So Radhapriya says, what if I feel sense gratification making my devotional service? That's transcendental sense gratification. You see, if you're happy in devotional service because you're pleasing Krishna, it's not sense gratification. It means your senses are being gratified as a result, and Prabhupada said, that your senses will be pleased. But if you're doing devotional service so you can gratify your senses, that's different. But if you like to do a service, like I'm giving a class now, okay? So I like speaking, but why did I decide to give this class? I decided to give this class every weekend because I know there are devotees that want to hear. I have disciples, I don't see them necessarily every year or even once a year, so that they want to hear me, so I can be here to give them instruction. They like that. So that's why I do it. It's not for my sense gratification, but I feel very happy doing it. So you could say my senses are gratified doing it. My desire to teach, my desire to learn, my desire to explain, my desire to relish Krishna consciousness, it's being satisfied by doing the service, but it's not why I'm doing it. I'm not doing it because I want to gratify my senses in some way. I want to dominate you with my knowledge or just gratify myself, like to hear myself talk. You understand? So if you're happy in devotional service, that's very good. If your senses are satisfied, gratified, that's very good, as long as that's not why you're doing it. And because sense gratification and your senses being satisfied in devotional service have different results. Sense gratification makes you more attached to that gratification, and your senses being satisfied as a result of engaging in devotional service satisfies you on a deeper level and detaches you from sense gratification. So, now you like to do certain services, you like to organize, you like to get things done. You can do that outside of Krishna consciousness, you can do that inside of Krishna consciousness. Outside of Krishna consciousness, you'll do it simply because you like to. Inside of Krishna consciousness, you'll do it not only because you like to, but you'll do it because there's something to organize. You won't just do it just because you like to and just make up something to organize that's not really of any value to anybody. You won't do that. So you'll find, it would be valuable if we did this service, or if we promoted this program, or if I arranged this program. And I like to organize. So now I'm doing it for Krishna. And so the whole time while you're doing it, you're thinking this is for Krishna. So it detaches you from sense gratification. I hope that's your experience. If that's not your experience, then maybe your motive is not pure. And you have to make sure, if you're doing something you like, you're doing it because you want to satisfy Krishna. Like I like music, I like singing, but you won't see me sitting around singing Beatles songs. But if I'm sitting around singing, you'll see me singing kirtan or bhajan, right? So I like to sing, but these are songs that please Krishna, so I do that for Krishna. So that's the difference, right? So if I'm just singing, my favorite Beatles songs, then that doesn't work. But if I'm singing, okay, I'll sing those Beatles songs, but I'll put Krishna conscious lyrics, we'll have kirtan, or I'll just put kirtan to the melody. And then now it's for Krishna. Now I've used what I like to do, but I will only do it if I can satisfy Krishna. So let me know if that explains it, and you experience that. You're saying this is Radhika, Reda Radhika, Reda Radhika. You are saying that in order to avoid material sense gratification, we engage in Krishna consciousness and seek higher taste, which makes all sense gratification. Which makes all sense, okay. However, lately, I am thinking, thinking could be dangerous. There was when I was young, we had a television show, like every day or every week, called The Three Stooges. And there's three guys who two guys are really dumb, always doing the wrong thing, and one guy not so dumb, always chastising them for doing the wrong thing, and it was just all the stupid things they did. And one of them said, I've been thinking. And the other one said, yeah. Well, what are you thinking about? And for me, that's pretty dangerous. So, Radhika say, however, lately I am thinking, and I thought of the Three Stooges who said, thinking could be dangerous. Isn't it true? Sometimes devotees write me with their problems. And when I'm reading it, I'm thinking, it would really be good if you didn't know how to think. Because if you just stopped thinking, you would stop thinking about all your problems that are driving you completely crazy. This thing bothers me, that bothers me. I'm thinking about this and I think, wow, maybe you should just stop thinking. Then your problems will go away. And sometimes I'm actually serious. Like, why are you thinking about all of this? So, lately I'm thinking of too much of Krishna, the problem and fear of surrender. I like that. I'm afraid I've got too much Krishna and not enough Maya. You want to hear a funny story? I had a devotee, he was so funny. I don't know where he is now. This was back in the 70s, God brother. And he really liked Krishna consciousness. But he was one of those, I don't know if you know this kind of devotee, that's like, Krishna consciousness is always a challenge because they just want to enjoy. But they love Krishna consciousness and they know the value of it and they're relishing it. But part of them is like, this is what you're saying, this is too much. I don't. So, every day he scheduled in an hour for Maya in his schedule. He said, my schedule's too intense. I need 1 hour for Maya every day just to recuperate. All right. I wouldn't say you schedule an hour for Maya, but you can schedule an hour for something, not pure unadulterated Maya, but a little nap, a little something, just to, recuperate, yeah. So I think that's what you're saying, right? The fear of surrender. We endeavor to engage in Krishna consciousness to the fullest of our ability, experience happiness, and then crash back down, and it becomes a cycle. So relishing Krishna consciousness triggers fear of losing it, and it's becoming more and more difficult to get back up. And this mentality of fear and cautionness, is that a word? Cautionness? Develops. All right, we'll make it a word. It's actually caution. This mentality of fear and caution develops. The higher you get in Krishna consciousness, the more painful is the fall. And it doesn't make sense because it's supposed to give protection. So we are sometimes speaking of sweet surrender, and though obviously that is attracting happiness in Krishna consciousness, also can equal pain. Well, I told you this thinking was dangerous. That thought is dangerous. But I don't think you're talking about a thought, you're thinking about an experience. Fear of surrender is real, and then falling away from surrender is real because we are afraid of surrender. You want to do a nice exercise? We do this in the japa workshops. You write down all your fears, like what will happen if I surrender? If I surrender, what if this happens? What if that happens? Write down all your fears. This is a really fun exercise. Radhika, you should definitely do this with Venurati, maybe. And you can both do it. So, if I surrender to Krishna, what if I fall back down? If I surrender to Krishna, what if I don't find a husband? If I surrender to Krishna, what if he keeps me poor? If I surrender to Krishna, what if he sends me to Siberia? If I surrender to Krishna, what if he makes me the head pujari or the temple president? Or he sends me on Sankirtan every day the rest of my life? You know, whatever your fear is. If what you're describing sounds like you have a fear, isn't it? So what's your fear? So whatever that fear is, write it down. The multiple fears. If I surrender to Krishna, maybe my husband will leave me. Maybe he'll take all my money. Maybe he'll want me to become a sannyasi, whatever it is. So you have your list. All your fears. Just honestly, what are you afraid of? What are you concerned? If I surrender more, then my guru will see I'm surrendered. Then he'll make me surrender more, engage me in more activities like that. Okay? Now what you do, you give that paper to your friend. So you give the paper to Venurati, and then Venurati reads it. If I surrender, I'm afraid Krishna will engage me full-time in book distribution. She reads what you wrote. But she's reading it as if it's hers, and you're her counselor. And now you have to counsel her. If I surrender to Krishna, I'm afraid Krishna will make me go on book distribution. And then you counsel her. Well, you know, Venurati, you have other talents and abilities, so why would Krishna not allow you to engage in those other abilities? And if you go on book distribution once in a while, it's very purifying. It's not bad, you know. It's not a horror movie out there in the street. There's so many people who want these books or waiting for these books, and you know when you go out you meet those nice people and it's really rewarding. So, but you know, because you have other talents and abilities and Krishna knows your desires, he's not going to force you to go out on book distribution every day. Next one, if I surrender to Krishna, then what if I can't maintain it? And then you just go on and you answer the questions as if they were her doubts. And you know what's going to happen after you do that, Radhika? You're going to be laughing. You're going to be looking at these and you're thinking, these are all baseless fears I have. Because fears are really baseless. Now, two other things I want to say. So please do that exercise. You're going to love it. You can all do it. You'll love it. It's a fun exercise actually, because you realize you end up counseling the other person out of all these fears, which are your fears, and you just laugh because you realize these fears were like completely ridiculous. Now, there's two other points you're making. As I know your question is a little deeper. The fear that if I go up, I'll come down. Now, maybe there's two ways to look at it. Maybe you're striving for something you can't maintain, so you come down. So it's better to strive for something you can maintain. Surrender will be relative to what you can maintain. So if you're going up and down, better surrender to something you can maintain. Yes? More steadily. So you want to try that. How can you be steady? Another principle. What you don't want to focus on what you're afraid of, because it tends to attract that. So I'm afraid, you know, let's say you're walking a tightrope, right? If you're walking a tightrope, I would imagine, just from experience, you don't want to think, what happens if I fall? All you want to think is you're only focused on how to get to the other side, the end of the rope, right? Isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I think we could all understand that. That if he's allows his mind to go one side or the other, that's where it'll go. So it's not really healthy, and it's not really productive to be focused on your what ifs. Well, what if, you know, I surrender this week, but what if I can't maintain it? And so it's almost like you expect that you can't maintain it, and you have a focus on you can't maintain it. You're afraid you can't maintain it, and you're feeding that fear, and so it tends to happen. So you want to find this level that you think you can maintain, and stop focusing on the what if I can't maintain it. And then, okay, but let's say periodically you can't maintain it, so deal with it. Get back up and deal with it. That's all you can do. Rather than focus on it, oh, what if I can't maintain it? The focus of what if I can't maintain it is just to find a level that you think you can maintain. But then when you find that level, stop worrying about if I can't maintain it, because that's going to cause you to not maintain it because your focus there's too much energy going there. Rather than just focus, okay, this is something I can maintain, so let's focus on maintaining it. And if by chance you slip and you fall on the ground, dust yourself off and get back up. That's just what you have to do. And for some of us, that may be the process of how we advance, that periodically we slip and fall, we dust ourselves off and get back up. In other words, according to your level of Krishna consciousness, that may be a stage that you're in right now that you just have to go through before you get beyond it, that you have doubts, you're weak, and periodically you're going to slip a little bit, but just get up and don't worry about it. Okay, I slipped, just get up. And every time you slip, get up again. And realize that maybe this is the stage I'm going through. I'm not very strong, or I'm going through some difficulties. And it's going to happen. But at the same time, we know that if you focus on your goal, the likelihood of slipping is reduced. And if you focus on what happens if I slip, the likelihood of slipping increases. Right? Does that make sense? Fernando Rico, a.k.a. Premananda Gaur, says, Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, son, you think you're a devotee, you're fallen. So wouldn't it be better to call ourselves Bhakti Yoga practitioner better, as practitioner? Everyone makes mistakes, yeah. Prabhupada said that. If I call myself a devotee and make a mistake or act improperly, it'll downplay what a real devotee is and make that amazing word devotee so cheaply used. Yeah. So I think it goes with the last thing I said. Let's say you accept that in this state, sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. You're not completely steady, and that's what you're going through. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in Madhurya Kadambini said that's a stage a lot of devotees go through. He didn't call it the yo-yo stage. I call it the yo-yo stage. Sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. It's just what you go through. There's a certain stage like that. It's called anishtita bhakti. It's unsteady. But you go through unsteady to get to steady. So that's nice. So Radhika, you understand you're a practitioner, and sometimes practitioners slip. So you're not a devotee, you're a practitioner devotee. You're trying to be a devotee. And maybe that definition will make it easier for you when you slip, because you realize I'm an anishtita practitioner. I'm a bit of a yo-yo right now. But if I go through the yo-yo stage and keep persevering through the yo-yo stage, I'll stop being a yo-yo. And I'll be nishta. I'll be like a bridge, solid rock. So it's a very good point. And Prabhupada said devotee's a big word. We're trying to be devotee. So defining where you're at, accepting. I think sometimes when you run into your demons and anarthas, at some point you have to accept this is how I am right now, so I just have to deal with it as best I can, rather than lament. Of course, it's okay to lament that I'm like this because I want to be better, but you don't want to lament in a way that is holding you back, holding you down, or discouraging you. So a lot of times in my earlier days in devotional service, the way I got through this unsteady bhakti was accepting that's where I'm at now, and these things this is what happens on this stage of bhakti. So I will be steady as much as I can. Sometimes I'd be a little bit of a yo-yo, but I'd understand that's part of what I'm going through, the yo-yo stage. So if that's what I have to go through to be Krishna conscious, I'll tolerate being a yo-yo, because if I can tolerate being a yo-yo, then eventually I'll get beyond the yo-yo stage. So that's how I dealt with it, and I think that's a positive way of dealing with it. And like Premananda Gaur says, if you don't identify yourself as some high devotee or devotee at all, but just a practitioner, then when you do your yo-yo, you don't feel so bad, because you realize, well, I'm a practitioner, and practitioners in the stage I am in, are yo-yos. Sometimes I read the statement of a famous actor who said that we wish everyone their all dreams and desires come true. I finally understand that when I make them happy. That's funny. He's famous, rich, etc., got everything he wanted and realized it did not make him happy. So maybe we need to please our senses to realize that it's not real happiness. I was thinking of this the other day because I was listening to someone who's like filthy rich, like hundreds of millions, owns his own island, owns his own jet, etc., etc. And he was saying, and he was sincere, I'm not saying he wasn't sincere about it, he was saying, he was talking about happiness, and he's saying, I have all this. Don't think this is what real happiness is about. It isn't. And people say, yeah, that's easy for you to say because you have it. And it's true. A lot of people say a lot of things because they have it. You don't have to do this to achieve success. Well, but you did that to achieve success. So it's easy for you to say you don't have to because right now you don't have to because you're already successful. But is that true for everybody else? So there is a bit of that. And your question is, which I know you don't believe 100%, but there's some truth in it, that maybe I need more gratification to know that gratification doesn't work. There is some truth to that because it's in the Bhagavatam that if you're too austere, then when you're older you're going to hanker for what you gave up. So you should satisfy your senses sufficiently when you're younger. But what does that mean? It doesn't mean go out and make $1 million and get a mansion and marry three women or get 10 husbands or drive a Mercedes. No, not a Mercedes. Drive a Bentley, $150,000 or something. It doesn't mean that. It means in a Krishna conscious way, satisfy your senses. So you get married, you have a nice home, children, you work, you make money, you have a nice life, but not a sensual life. That's what it means. So you can't live as a brahmachari or renunciate. Okay, get married. Now you have a license for sex for procreation, once a month after 50 rounds. Not much of a license. Once you get pregnant, that's it, it's over. Until you have another baby. Well, that's kind of a limited license, right? But still, that's the whole point. You have a limited license for sense gratification because if you engage too much in sense gratification, then it's going to take you away from Krishna. So the point you're making is you want to satisfy yourself enough so you can renounce it. That's true. Some people are already renounced. They don't need it. They already know that. They already did that before they were devotees. Some after they're devotees realize that they're not completely satiated. So you satisfy it in a way that helps you, not in a way that doesn't help you. You get married, have a nice place. I have a nice house. My wife likes a nice house. So I'm married, have a nice house. Have a car. I have right now, because all of you give me so many clothes, I think I surpassed my wife in clothes. Now I have lots of clothes. I'm confused every day. I don't know what to wear. So I just wear a t-shirt and a sweatshirt. But I have about 15 beautiful shirts and 8 pairs of pants. I never had so much in my life. Okay, and I don't even like dressing nice, but if I did, it would satisfy my desire to dress nice. Okay, I have all these beautiful clothes, I love to dress up. Okay, it's out of my blood, I have them, I don't think about it. So sometimes the idea is, if you don't have it, you think about it, and once you have it, you don't think about it, because it's not that big a thing anyway. You know what I mean? You realize it's not such a big thing, and so you have it. I have a guitar. I have a nice guitar, and Badahari's wife has the guitar for 5 months, for 5 years, and I haven't used it. I'm like guitared myself out when I was young, before I was a devotee. But I had this guitar to do recordings. Then I hardly played it. So, and I played it every day before I was a devotee. So I don't need it now. If I wasn't guitared out, I'd have the guitar, I'd play it, get it out of my blood, so I could get on and do my other service or engage in Krishna service. So when you have it, it's like you say, when you have it, it's kind of like you realize you don't need it. When you don't have it, you meditate on it. So there is truth to that. And so the point is, satisfy it in a way that's Krishna conscious, so it doesn't deviate you. Otherwise, in the name of satisfying it, then you're going to have a problem. So Radhapriya says, I think it's more helpful to make a devotional service that I don't like. To detachment from sense gratification. What do you think about it? I'll let you decide. I'll let you decide. I think in a more advanced stage, you wouldn't say that. Maybe in your position, and maybe that's better for you. That's why I say what you just said. Maybe if you feel I'm engaging in a service and I love to do it, it becomes a kind of sense gratification. I don't really think it's sense gratification unless you're controlling something and you really like controlling people, telling them what to do, and it's puffing up your ego. Yeah, that wouldn't be good. But if it's just that you enjoy doing the service, it's not puffing up your ego, you're not controlling people, it's not pulling you into sense gratification anyway, then doing what you like is fine. I mean, the willingness to do what you don't like, if you're doing something you like, but you're also willing to do something you don't like, that's good. That's a kind of detachment. That's nice. But sometimes doing what we like is what gives us energy. But it's not, as I said before, it's not sense gratification because I like it. It's sense gratification because I'm doing it to satisfy my senses. Now, if you're doing the service to satisfy your senses, yeah, that's a problem, for sure. So I'm going to let you have to decide how to answer that question. I can only give you the principle. Amrita Radhika, from all the way over in Sydney, can you hear me out there? You know, back in the day when we were in India, like the 70s, and you'd be talking or you'd be calling India, you had to scream. They couldn't hear you if you didn't scream. So it was like you were screaming over the ocean. I also recently came to the realization that sometimes we can become steady, but also become comfortable as well. So sometimes going that extra bit further is what we need. Yeah, that's a good point. What we need to surrender more. Yeah. You know, there's purport, I think it's the second canto, a comfortable life and Krishna consciousness don't go well together. Look at Prabhupada's life. I mean, it was comfortable in one sense, but very uncomfortable in another sense because of the constant travel and the constant responsibility and the huge responsibility and the need he had to find the time to write his books. So what you say is very true. We want to be comfortable, but not too comfortable. We want to be comfortable in the sense that our minds and senses aren't agitated, but not in the sense we become so comfortable that we lose our impetus, our strong impetus for self-realization and our strong impetus to share Krishna consciousness. That would be bad. You know, then it's like Krishna consciousness just for me, I'm very comfortable with it, and Krishna's very kind, he's providing everything. But we want to be on the edge a little bit, to share it. That's very important. And Prabhupada really emphasized sharing it. And I think that's the best way not to be comfortable. Because sharing it is not always comfortable. It's blissful, but a lot of times you have to go out of your comfort zone. And so, you know, one way to look at this question or answer this question is we actually need both. You need to be comfortable in your sadhana, peaceful and happy in your Krishna consciousness, and also be willing to go out of your comfort zone to spread it. Like you may go to the Dham. Okay, so now that's going to be a new place. It's India, you know, this and that. That may be difficult. 3,000 people in the temple, it's hot. So maybe not so comfortable, but really good for your Krishna consciousness, so you do it. But we do need a certain level of comfort, which is not sense gratification, it's just stability. Think of that kind of comfort as stability. I need a certain situation where I'm just stable enough where I can chant peacefully and hear peacefully. So that's why if someone was disturbed and wanted to get married, and say, okay, you get married in Krishna consciousness, create a situation which is peaceful. That's the Prabhupada would say, be peaceful. Which it seems today is kind of rare being peaceful and married. It seems like a contradiction. Unfortunately, for many people, that's a contradiction. Being married is not being peaceful. But that was Prabhupada's idea. You get married, okay, you need this, be peaceful. So once you have that, you calm down. Now he's a brahmachari, he's a brahmacharini, a little disturbed, get married to calm down. That's the idea. Okay, now that you're calm, now you can go out of your comfort zone, because you have comfort on this level, which then allows you to go out of your comfort zone on another level. Yeah. But Himena says, Bhakti practitioner suits me better. We're all Bhakti practitioners, that's the point. All of us. Until you have prema, you're a Bhakti practitioner. So Radhapriya decided she's going to continue the service she likes to do. Yeah, it's a great service, promoting the Prabhupada film. Amrita Radhika says, and also going through the next level of purification. I just sold my car and have no job, and I'm about to move to the farm and live as a full-time devotee. Just go deeper into Krishna consciousness. But also it's the next level of purification I need to grow. Yeah. When I was a young devotee, had one god brother, and he always preached, "What's your next level? What's the next level?" I like that. Like, not complacent. Now you're firmly situated on whatever level you're on. So what's the next level? And we heard a great story yesterday. You may know this story. Shyama Prabhu was carving Jagannath, and Prabhupada came over to see how he was doing. And he was a new devotee, and he was smoking. So he had the pack of cigarettes on the top of the deity he was carving. So I think Prabhupada with his cane knocked it off. Anyway, it's like Prabhupada asked him, "What's going on?" And he said, "I smoke." The Prabhupada said, "Well, could you just smoke one cigarette less every day?" And he said, "Yeah, I could do that." So that's how he gave up smoking. But then Prabhupada said something really powerful. He said, "Are you going to allow these cigarettes to get between you and Krishna?" Isn't that nice? So, when we talk about the next level, it's like, well, what is it right now that I could give up or move beyond that's getting in the way between my relationship with Krishna? So that's the idea of the next level. Oh, maybe I'm doing this and I shouldn't be. It's not good for my Krishna consciousness. So that's getting in the way. So the next level would be to give that up. Or maybe I'm not doing something. What's getting in the way? What's getting in the way is that I'm not doing something. So okay. So I should be doing something. So the not doing something is getting in the way between my relationship and Krishna. And the next level would be to do that. So I think it's a nice question to ask yourself, what is getting in the way between you and Krishna? What could you do? What are you not doing, or what could you be doing? And so next level. I like that. I like that next level. What's the next level for me? What's the next step? I had a godbrother, brahmachari, maybe 40 plus years, he was brahmachari, and people were wondering, well, why don't you take sannyasi? He was a spiritual master. And he didn't feel the need. And then he explained, he said, I came to a point where I felt that taking sannyas for me now would be the next level. This would actually help. Before I didn't think it would help. So that was his motive to do it, that it would be the next level for him of surrender. So, ladies and gentlemen, what is your next level of surrender? What is it? What's the next step you need to take? It's a nice meditation, don't you think? Okay, we've come to the end of your questions. We have many more quotes to read. And tomorrow we're going to give class at 8:15 p.m. Sydney time, which is 6:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and Sundari Radha is going to give me something to talk about, because I don't know what we're talking about. And Sundari Radha, whatever it is we're talking about, also tell Guru Nishta to advertise that, and you can advertise that amongst your people in Australia. And Sundari Radha always comes up with something that's relevant to where devotees are at, or what she's going through, or what her friends are going through. So on Mondays we always talk about something relevant. Of course, not that we weren't talking about something relevant today, but she picked something relevant. So that means it's going to start 15 minutes earlier than this class started, and that means it's going to start an hour and 45 minutes earlier than it is right now. So whatever time it is now, an hour 45 minutes earlier is when it's going to start. And we'll see you tomorrow. And Hare Krishna. have a good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. And always remember, there is the next level to come to. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Go Premanandi. Hare Hare Bol. Hare Krishna.